In the second installment of our series covering the history of every banned card in the expanded format, today we'll be focusing on the most powerful disruption cards that receive bans for doing anything from removing your opponent's entire hand on their first turn of the game to gatekeeping multiple archetypes. The supporter card Ghetsis was the first hand disruption card the Pokémon Company decided to ban. When you play Ghetsis, your opponent reveals their hand. Then they shuffle all item cards that were revealed into their deck, and you get to draw a card for each card they shuffled into their deck. If you watched the first part in this series, you'll be familiar with how prevalent item cards were in decks at the time. Most decks throughout the Black and White and XY eras of the game played around 40% item cards. While this over-reliance on item cards was decreasing in the early Sun and Moon era thanks to release of Garbodor from the Guardians Rising expansion, its Trash-a-Lanch attack dealing 20 damage times the number of item cards in your opponent's discard pile, players still could not part with critical item cards that allowed them to set up the start of their game. Ultra Ball, which allowed you to discard 2 cards from your hand to search out any Pokemon from your deck, was crucial to getting your attacks and supporter Pokemon in play. Rare Candy was necessary in any deck at the time that played Stage 2 Pokemon, which relied on traditional evolution because it allows you to evolve a basic Pokemon straight into a Stage 2 Pokemon, skipping the Stage 1. Choice Band was critical for attackers like Drampa GX and its Berserk attack. It deals 80 base damage plus 80 more damage if one of your bench Pokemon has any damage counters on it, which was always 10, 20, or 30 damage short of one-hit KOing popular basic Pokemon EX and Pokemon GX, which had between 170 and 190 HP without the help of Choice Band. Floatstone was critical for allowing your Pokemon to get in and out of the active spot, and the tool of choice for decks featuring Garbotox and Garbodor, which shut off all other abilities to play as long as it had a tool card attached. While Ghetsis has been around since the Team Plasma sets and Black and White era, it didn't see a huge amount of play. It was difficult to find on the first turn of the game where it was the most powerful. Remember, during Black and White through Sun and Moon eras, you could play a supporter card on your first turn going first. Jirachi EX's Stellar Guidance could be used to find it, allowing you to search for a supporter card whenever you put Jirachi into your bends. But Jirachi's extremely low 90 HP for being a Pokemon EX gave your opponent a huge opportunity to take advantage of that, made up for the slower starts Ghetsis would result in. In 2017's Guardians Rising, Tapu Lele GX with the Wonder Tag ability was released. This ability has the same effect as Jirachi EX's Stellar Guidance, but Tapu Lele GX has 170 HP. Almost twice that of Jirachi, and Tapu Lele has an extremely versatile and powerful attack and Energy Drive, which Jirachi did not have access to. Energy Drive does 20 damage times the number of energy cards attached to both active Pokemon and isn't affected by weakness and resistance. This combination of good HP and a great attack meant putting Tapu Lele into play on turn 1 to find Ghetsis was well worth any consequences. The Pokémon Company finally took action in July of 2018 against this annoying and powerful combo, adding Ghetsis to the ban list where it resides to this day. The next card we'll discuss were all part of one of the most deadly hand disruption combos the game has seen in the post-Black and White modern era. First, you start by placing the item Red card or by putting Marshadow on the bench to use its Let Loose ability. Red card makes your opponent shuffle their hand into their deck and then draw for a card. Marshadow's Let Loose ability has the same effect to your opponent, but also makes you shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 4 cards as well. Red card's effect was more useful if you already had the next combo piece in your hand, while Marshadow's effect could allow you to draw more cards in order to find them if you didn't already have access to them. Occasionally, players included a few copies of Unknown from the Ancient Origins expansion with the Farewell Letter ability to use with Marshadow. Farewell Letter allowed you to discard Unknown from play, then draw a card. You could put multiple Unknown on your bench, use Marshadow's Let Loose ability, then use all of your Unknown's Farewell Letter abilities to draw more cards, making it far less likely for you to draw an unplayable hand off of Marshadow's Let Loose. The next step in the combo was the supporter card Delinquent. Delinquent allows you to discard a stadium card in play, and if you do, your opponent has to discard 3 cards from their hand. After playing Red card and Marshadow, your opponent had to discard cards from their 4-card hand all the way down to 1 card. Importantly, they were allowed to choose the cards to discard and which ones to keep. This 2-card combo was already powerful enough on its own that it saw play in both the standard and expanded formats. Often in the expanded format, it was paired with Seismitoad EX's Quaking Punch attack, which deals 30 damage and prevents your opponent from playing any item card from their hand during the next turn. Even if your opponent drew a supporter card like Professor Sycamore and decided to keep all of their single cards after Delinquent, they would be forced to play out the rest of the turn without access to item cards at all. But there's one final combo piece that was often used to make the combo as deadly as possible: Peeking Red card. Peeking Red card is an item card which allows you to look at your opponent's hand, then you may have your opponent shuffle their hand into their deck and draw an equal amount of cards to what they had before. If your opponent kept a Professor Sycamore in their hand, you could simply have your opponent shuffle it into their deck and force them to draw 1 completely random card instead. This combo was clearly broken, but it wasn't one of the most consistent strategies on its own. Finding a 3-card combo without using a supporter card to draw or search out the pieces you need was challenging. That's where Zoroark GX comes in. Zoroark was one of, if not the most powerful Pokemon in the expanded format at the time. The cost of its Riotous Beating attack could be fulfilled by a single double colorless energy, and does 20 damage times the number of Pokemon you have in play. In the standard format, this was capped at 120 damage if you had 6 Pokemon in play, 1 active and 5 benched. or 150 damage when a choice band was attached, meaning Zoroark GX was forced to 2-hit KO most popular Pokemon GX. However, in the expanded format, Zoroark had access to the stadium card Skyfield. This card lets both players have up to 8 Pokemon on their bench instead of 5. This allowed Zoroark to reach up to 180 damage, or 210 with a choice band. Now, Zoroark was a one-hit KOing all basic Pokemon GX and most popular Stage 1 Pokemon GX, like opposing Zoroark GXs, all for a single energy attachment. But Zoroark's attacks wasn't even the best part about the card. Once during your turn, you could use Zoroark's trade ability, where you discard a card from your hand, then draw 2 cards. One use of this ability in a turn was already insightful enough for a few decks to include Empoleon with the diving draw ability, which is identical to trade, and Archie's Ace in the Hole to get it into play with a great deal of effort. You can play Archie's Ace in the Hole only when it's the last card in your hand. It allows you to put a water-type Pokemon from your discard pile into your bench, then draw 5 cards. But considering that Zoroark was a Stage 1 Pokemon and a fantastic attacker, you could easily get up to 4 in play at once and use trade 4 times each turn. The ability to draw 8 new cards each turn made getting these 3-card combos into your hand extremely easy, and players were regularly eliminating their opponent's entire hand on the second turn of the game, and occasionally the first if they happened to draw the pieces sooner. The Pokémon Company decided to tackle this combo in the January 2019 ban list update by adding Delinquent to the ban list. Red Card and Marshadow would be subject to the same fate 10 months later when the Pokémon Company decided to take a stronger stance on hand disruption of the format. The supporter card Jessie and James, released in the Hidden Fates expansion in August of 2019, could also be used to accomplish the same thing as Delinquent. When played, both players had to discard 2 cards from their hand. Jessie and James was printed alongside Wheezing, which, when discarded by the affected Jessie and James, would force your opponent to discard an additional card from their hand. If you discarded 2 Wheezings with the affected Jessie and James, your opponent would be forced to discard 4 cards from their hand in total. Because of the obvious power of this card and its similarity to Delinquent, it was banned before it even became legal for tournament play. With the release of the Cosmic Eclipse expansion in November of 2019, the Pokémon Company decided to enact another preemptive ban. This time, however, it was an older card which had seen no competitive play whatsoever. Flabébé from 2018's Forbidden Light expansion. Flabébé is a basic Pokemon with only 30 HP and a terrible attack. The only remarkable thing that Flabébé possesses is its ability, Evolutionary Advantage. If you go second, Flabébé can evolve during your first turn. Up until Cosmic Eclipse release, the best Floette the Pokemon Flabébé evolves into was the sparsely played Floette, which had the Flower Veil ability, giving your Grass-type Pokemon 20 extra HP. But Cosmic Eclipse brought a new Floette, which, when paired with the Evolutionary Advantage Flabébé, could result in a devastating combo. Floette's Flower Picking ability says, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may choose a random card from your opponent's hand. Your opponent reveals that card and shuffles it into their deck. With the help of item cards like De-Evolution Spray, you could remove your opponent's entire hand on your first turn if you went second. Because the ability also removes a random card, your opponent couldn't choose to save a supporter card like Professor Sycamore to draw out of the combo if you didn't remove all of your opponent's cards, like with Delinquent earlier. Even if you couldn't remove their entire hand, it's likely that you would have left them with an unplayable hand after a few uses of flower picking. Rather than wait for this strategy to be refined and see play, the Pokémon Company chose to ban the not-so-incident Flabébé, leaving Floette as mediocre as it was intended to be. The next card isn't a disruption card directly, but it was used alongside the card that made disruptive-based strategies so consistent, Zoroark GX. Puzzle of Time is an item card with 2 effects. If you play Puzzle of Time normally, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. That's not a very strong effect in Pokemon, but it can be useful for getting you out of a spot when your hand is unplayable. You can also play 2 Puzzles of Time at the same time to get its secondary effect instead. Put any 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. Zoroark's trade ability made it easy to find 2 of these cards at the same time, which resulted in Puzzle of Time allowing Zoroark decks to be extremely greedy with their resources. Normally, you'd have to be especially considerate about the resources you discard with trade, but Puzzle of Time meant resources were often better in the discard pile, so they could be found more easily later. Additionally, expanded Zoroark decks chose to play only 4 double colorless energy and no other energy cards. They could get away with only 4 because of Puzzle of Time and Special Charge, an item card that allows you to shuffle 2 special energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. But it wasn't just Zoroark GX that made use of Puzzle of Time. It was often found in other decks that are capable of drawing a lot of cards and burning tons of resources. The most popular of these archetypes was Night March. The archetype focuses around 3 Pokemon that all had the Night March attack, Joltik, Pumpkaboo, and Lampent. Night March does 20 damage times the number of Pokemon in a discard pile with the Night March attack. Players would use powerful cards like Battle Compressor, an item card which allows you to search your deck for any 3 cards and discard them to reach upwards of 200 damage before factoring in Choice Band while attacking with non-GX Pokemon that only give up 1 prize card when knocked out. Joltik's Night March attack only costs 2 colorless energy, and Pumpkinboo's Night March attack only costs 2 colorless energy while the Dimension Valley Stadium card is in play, reducing the attacks of all Psychic-type monsters by 1 colorless energy. So, players adopted this same strategy as Zoroark did by only including 4 double colorless energy and no other energy cards. The extreme flexibility and disregard for resources that Puzzle of Time added to Zoroark GX and other archetypes was enough to warrant the ban it received. But it was even more powerful combined with another card which Zoroark GX abused, Hex Maniac. Hex Maniac is a supporter card that, when played, removes the abilities of all Pokemon in play, in either player's hand and in either player's discard pile until the end of your opponent's next turn. Normally, Hex Maniac would have the downside of consuming your one supporter for the turn, making it difficult to play multiple Hex Maniacs in succession. But Zoroark's trade ability steps in once again to prevent that from being too large of a downside. Zoroark decks would often attempt to end each turn by playing a Hex Maniac, shutting off all their opponent's abilities without resulting in any downside to the Zoroark GX player. Obviously, an opposing Zoroark's trade ability was crucial to shut off with Hex Maniac, and mirror matches often came down to who was forced to break their chain of Hex Maniacs first. But what were the other most powerful abilities in the format? Shaman EX had one of the most powerful abilities in the format and setup. When you played Shaman from your hand onto your bench, you may draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. As mentioned in the last episode, this ability is similar to the more recent Crobat V's Dark Acid ability. But it isn't limited to once per turn, meaning you could draw tons of cards on your first turn and build an insanely powerful board state on the first turn of the game. The aforementioned Tapu Lele and its Wonder Tag ability was also featured in almost every deck in the format. Another of Expanded's most utilized Pokemon, Execute from 2013's Plasma Freeze expansion, was featured in many decks for its ability, Propagation. Once during your turn, you may put an Execute from your discard pile into your hand. This ability was especially useful for fulfilling discard costs of cards like Ultra Ball, but could also be used to, once again, help out Zoroark and its trade ability. Due to an interesting quirk of Pokemon TCG's rulings, the once during your turn clause of Execute was effectively nullified. Your hand is private knowledge, which means that once an Execute enters your hand, the once during your turn effect is reset as Execute effectively becomes a new card altogether. This meant you could use Zoroark's trade ability to discard an Execute, put the Execute back into your hand, then use another Zoroark's trade, put the same Execute card back into your hand again, use Ultra Ball to discard Execute again, and repeat the process until you used all of your Zoroark's trade abilities, and fulfill the discard cost of any other cards you wish to play. We can also look to what new decks started popping up shortly after Hex Maniac's ban to determine what powerful archetypes Hex Maniac was gatekeeping out of the format. Decks that were focused around the aforementioned Archie's Ace in the Hole and Blastoise began seeing success immediately. Blastoise's Deluge ability allows you to attach as many water energy cards as you want from your hand to your Pokemon during your turn, bypassing the normal once per turn restriction on attaching energy cards. This allowed you to utilize powerful but expensive attacks with ease, like Palkia GX's once per game Zero Vanish GX attack, which deals 150 damage and shuffles all energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon into their deck. Additionally, decks focusing on Trevenant's Forest Curse abilities started seeing more play again, as they could be sure their opponent couldn't easily deactivate its ability. As long as Trevenant is your active Pokemon, Forest Curse prevents your opponent from playing any item cards from their hand. All of these powerful abilities and archetypes were shut off by Hex Maniac, which reduced the creativity of the format significantly, and resulted in the Pokémon Company issuing a ban on the card. Alright, and that's it for this installment of the history of every banned card in the expanded format. Look out for the next part. We'll be covering a variety of cards that manipulate your opponent's prize cards to create some of the most oppressive decks the game has ever seen. And comment what you found most interesting about the cards and decks featured in this video.